Hi, and welcome to the Days Gone podcast. I'm Claire Weaver, a screenwriter, author, and Days Gone fan, and this podcast is a place to discuss the game in all its glory, share my opinions, both popular and unpopular, and listen to me fangirl over one of the best games ever made. There will be spoilers ahead, so continue at your own risk. Welcome to the Freak Show. Welcome back to my discussion with Ritchie Belmont about the politics of the various camps and organizations in Days Gone. Let's move on to Lost Lake.
Lost Lake.
Because this is the one that everyone seems to identify with. This is the one that if you ask anyone, they're like, yep, I want to live at Lost Lake. Like, if you could choose, who would want to live at any of the other camps? But it's not without its problems. I discussed on the podcast before Iron Mike's ideology and how it's sort of presented like he's a pacifist and he's trying to rebuild civilization and kind of looking to the future in an idealized way of like, we need to stop surviving and find a way to start living again. That whole theme of surviving isn't living, which is great and grand and awesome. Like, sure, it's been 2 years. Like, yeah, at some point you have to get back to having something to live for. But Lost Lake is not perfect. Iron Mike is not a perfect leader. He is an idealist and kind of out of touch with reality at times. It's also, although it's probably the closest that we have to modern society out of the different options that you have, it's not a democracy. You know, Iron Mike is the leader, and he has Schizo is his right-hand man, and he takes advice from Ricky and from Deacon. They're, I guess, kind of a sort of council of advisors, but honestly, it doesn't matter. Iron Mike is in charge. So how would you describe the system of Lost Lake?
Well, the closest thing that I have is, it reminds me when, now we're going ancient history, but it reminds me when Rome as a republic fell. And when it fell, the idea of the emperor, that wasn't really official. That was a word that they didn't throw around because the Republic really hated that concept. That's why they became a republic, because they were tired of this idea of one person being in charge. So when it eventually fell apart ideologically and it turned into what we now know as the Roman Empire, the very first person in charge was Caesar Augustus. And he didn't see himself as an emperor. He had a lot of power like one. He had power like a king. He had a council like kings. He still had the Senate, because you couldn't run Rome without the Senate. The Senate was like the most important part of that particular society. But at the end of the day, all decisions were finalized by Augustus. So when I look at Lost Lake, I kind of see it like that, where he's spouting, much like Augustus, he was spouting this idea of, I want Rome to be back to the way things are, but it needs help. So I'm going to hold on to it. Iron Mike doesn't act like him, because eventually Rome never goes back to the way it used to be. But Iron Mike, unlike Caesar Augustus, was very hell-bent on this idea of like, we got to go back. I want things to go back to the way they were. In the description of the camp, I didn't write it down, but there is a reference in the map that says like this camp wants to go back to the way things were, back to like democracy or back to something like that. I might be wrong on the details, but that's sort of like the paraphrasing aspect of it. But I think the major flaw that Iron Mike has is that he wants things to go back to the way they are. But the problem is that, like, how do you do that in a world where the freaks are clearly in charge?
Mm-hmm. That's what I mean when I say he's an idealist, and that's kind of a downside. I myself am an idealist, but it's not practical a lot of the time.
No, it's not in this situation, especially not in the specific situation that you find yourself when you go in there. You're walking in the middle of a very tense diplomatic situation between Lost Lake and the Rippers. Mm-hmm. Iron Mike is convinced that he has broken a peace between him and Carlos, aka Jesse. And Schizo is not having it. He's almost convinced, and I was convinced too. Once, I mean, at first I was like, well, I don't know who the Rippers are, but they did burn my boy's arm.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're telling me that that group of people is going to hold on to their end of this peace treaty, no way, dude.
No,
Not in a
no,
million
no, not a
years.
fucking chance.
No,
And that's,
no.
I had the same reaction when I'm listening to Schizo say those lines up at the mine and that whole sequence. It's like, yeah, as much as this guy is unlikable and like a douchebag, he's spouting facts. The Rippers are not going to uphold their side of the treaty.
No, and it's funny because even a clock is wrong 2 times a day, and that just happens to be one of the two things that Schizo seems to be right about, is that you can't trust the Rippers. You can't do it. It's not possible. But Iron Mike, like you said, he's an idealist. He believes that people can change, and I think that has something to do with because I was based on the episode that you did, 2-parter episode that you did. I think it just has something to do with his own personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
He seems to have been a real son of a bitch. And then the massacre happens, and he seems to change his tune. Whether he was a part of the massacre or he just happened to have been there and just witnessed the brutality of how people can be, I really do like the idea that he was a part of the. Because you don't change your mind like that just simply watching
Right.
the massacre happened, because you already had that thought in your head, and he would have presented it as like, you know what, the other group, they really wanted. He's very vague about describing what happened. So there's a part of me that thinks like, you were that other group. You
Mm-hmm.
saw the massacre. You saw how ridiculous it was in terms of the carnage, and you changed your way as a form of penance. And I think that may come. It's not the Iron Mike episode, but he's a really cool guy. I like him. But in essence, like, you would want to go all out on the wanting to go back to the way things were if you witnessed or you were, a part of that massacre. But to people like Deacon and Schizo, and I'm not sure how Ricky and Addie feel about it, because those are like the main characters in Lost Lake. They don't really, well, actually that's not true, because Ricky, when you're in the dam, she gets up and she's like, hey, there's a peace treaty, hey, and they start
Mm-hmm.
shooting at him, and Deacon's like, no, fuck, what are you doing?
You fucking idiot.
Yeah, that's probably like a theory why Ricky's probably not where Schizo is, but that's a different conversation. Well, we'll get there. We'll get there. But
Yeah.
so Iron Mike is trying to rebuild society, and it's just not realistic in terms of like these decisions that he's making. Like, oh, he's pacifist. He doesn't want to have war, but like the metalhead in me believes that if you want peace, prepare for war, and that's like Schizo's mentality
Mm-hmm.
of it. And they butt heads. When you're sneaking to get the medicine, you can kind of hear the conversation that they're having. And Iron Mike's attitude about it is just like, I know what I'm doing. You're not in charge. I'm in charge. And this idea of returning to the way things are, that's not how things were. If you wanted to call it a democracy in the most basic form, that's not really what democracy is, in its classic sense. You would want to make a choice. You get everyone in the camp together. You present your values. You present the options, and everyone has a say. But that's not what's going on. Iron Mike is looking at kind of like a father. He
Mm-hmm.
sees himself as the father, and all the campers are the part of the family. So he's looking out for the family, but you can't do that. You can't expect that type. I don't know. Maybe I'm assuming that Iron Mike is not being practical about how long that goal would take to normalize things in this environment. If he felt like thinking that the peace with the Rippers was going to work, no, then that was a terrible idea. If he felt like, if I could get these Rippers to not attack us, then maybe, just maybe, we can get a dialogue going to sort of enact a series of change. Because I would assume that Iron Mike is the type of guy that's like, change begets change. And that's kind of what he tells, that's kind of like the idea that he gives Deacon, right before he dies, you're in
Mm-hmm.
charge now, or he says something like that. Because he sees a lot of himself in Deacon. Maybe perhaps he sees Deacon as like the kind of guy that Iron Mike wishes he was, like a hybrid of idealism with practicality. Like
Yeah, like a
Deacon's not the
balanced
yeah,
nature.
yeah. Deacon's not the kind of guy that would think that Carlos would be okay with the. Well, it wouldn't work anyways because the peace requires them giving Boozer and Deacon to them,
Hmm.
which Iron Mike refuses,
Right.
but is upset that he has to do that because he's like, well, I'm not going to let one of my own away, but I don't want you to fight us. But it's like you can't have it both ways.
Mm.
You got to make that choice, and that's
He's trying to be too much of a pacifist or too much of a non-confrontational person, too
yeah.
diplomatic, without sacrifice.
He's going full ass. If I would make Copeland's half ass, he's going full ass. But that's also a problem because you're not seeing all options
Right.
because his attitude is simply I make the final word. At the very least, he gives the impression that I get is that unlike Tucker, at least if he refuses your opinion, he's not going to tell you that it's stupid or anything. He'll say something like, "I understand what you're saying, but I'm going to do it my way."
Yeah.
And at least he'll be like, "But you know what? You said what you wanted to say, and I respect it." Tucker wouldn't even Tucker wouldn't even fucking say that part. He'd just be like, "Shut up, keep working."
Hmm.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the counterpart to Lost Lake and talk about Iron Butte and the Ripper political system, the Ripper camp.
Oh yeah, the Branch Davidians.
So, theological system of politics, that would probably be the correct
They're just
term. Or
they're just a cult.
just a
They're
cult.
just a cult. Yeah. You don't when you're a cult, it doesn't really matter what political ideology you are. Like, I mean, I would imagine a cult is like, if you want to get there, I would say like it's authoritarian. It
Hmm.
is one person who's in charge. Uh, I would assume that it's easier. It was easier to handle because like at least a cult is at least not so. At least they're going to be upfront about how things are going to be, how they're going to function,
Hmm.
and they're not going to unlike places like unlike Copeland's camp or Tucker's camp or Lost Lake is the closest analog to what we are now because if I were to put it in a spectrum, I would say Lost Lake knows that there's dirty things that have to happen, but Iron Mike's not going to do it. But in our society, we need to depend on people who are going to do the dirty work. There's your Schizo and his crew. Copeland's camp is like we got to do what we got to do to survive, and that means scavenging. If it means taking someone that's helping you's bike because they weren't there to do it, that's fine. Tucker's whole thing is it's my way or the highway. We got to keep this camp running. That's fine. At the very least, there's different levels of subtlety. When you get to the Rippers, I don't think they fucking care about anything other than what Carlos wants or Jesse. Sorry, Jesse and the Rippers. Uh, that's got to be a Full House reference. It really does. I don't know. I got to ask them. It's like, listen, you're telling me that you named the guy Jesse, who's in charge of the Rippers, and that's not a Full House. I know you haven't seen it Full House, but I mean, you tell me. You tell me, everybody out there in podcast land, like, is this a Full House reference? Jesse and the Rippers.
We'll have to find out. I'll have to ask some people who know some people and see if we can figure out if that was a Full House reference.
I don't know if I'll get an opportunity to bring that up for everyone to ponder at it, but I'm gonna shoot my shot on that one.
Yeah.
But you mentioned in the notes a cult, and you write down like, okay, how do you control people when you're in a cult? Well, you do two things. You either force them to do it or they come in willingly. And based on the Ripper's way of thinking, I would imagine that the people that choose to find the Rippers are basically listening to what Jesse's saying, which is like, I want to forget. And that's a really easy thing to do. Like, if you find yourself in a situation where you're tired, you're hungry, you don't know anything, you've lost everything, like the whole Lisa thing. I forget, did Lisa get captured by the Rippers, or did Lisa join just like
It
that?
is unclear.
I can see both sides. I mean, I can see how that works.
It's kind of talked about like she was kidnapped, but it is sort of implied that maybe she wasn't. Or it's certainly open enough that maybe she went willingly. Now, when you do find her, she's very distraught and they've
Yeah.
started cutting her and everything. But the cutting is supposed to be part of the initiation and not part of the torture. Because they do torture people to break them to get them to join. But I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that the mutilation is actually part of some sort of when you're accepting the doctrine. You choose to do it. You do it to yourself. So I don't know if it's just purposefully ambiguous or if it's just a little confused in the mythology and the lore of the Rippers. It's unclear, but it's definitely open enough that she could have gone willingly, at least at the beginning, gone willingly with them. And then, of course, when she rescues Deacon in the Ripper camp, she is willingly part of this. And
Yeah.
obviously, there's the question of how brainwashed is she? Is she high? Have they given her drugs? But she is
Well, obviously
willingly
not
a part of
enough. Yeah,
this.
not enough because she does end up like uh, saving you of some sort. She does release you from the strap.
Mm-hmm.
You get
Yeah, and then
burned
she
once,
then
and
leaves because the next time you don't kill her when you blow up the dam, she's gone.
yeah,
And then the next time you see her, I think, is when right at the end of the game where she shows up as a drifter. And I like
yeah,
the idea that she is almost too strong to be a Ripper because she starts out as kind of like a weak or seemingly weak. Everyone assumes she's weak, but she's actually stronger than anyone gave her credit for. And her joining the Rippers, it's almost like she takes what she needs from that experience and from them and learns from it and is like, you know what? These guys, they're just running around doing the fucking dumbass cult thing. I'm better than this. Takes
yeah,
their strength and the experience that she's given and the confidence she's given and moves on and chooses, I want to be a drifter. This is the life for me. I'm badass enough that I can
yeah.
do
I
this.
would say that Lisa would be the better version of what Deacon is. Like Deacon's like
Mm-hmm.
way like the way Deacon and Lisa handle trauma. Deacon just wants to live in the past. And I don't mean like he wants to live like the way things were. It just the trauma of the past clouds
It's
how he handles life. Whereas
yeah.
Lisa, as she progresses, she sees it as a way to like focus herself to be a better person,
Mm-hmm.
a better drifter at the very least. So that makes sense. But to sort of go back to what you were saying, Jesse was a guy who was in the mongrels, did something really fucked up for them to get kicked out. They burn his tattoo, his back tattoo out, and and that's the story that I'm aware of in terms of who he is in relation to Deacon and Boozer
Mm-hmm.
and the situation at hand.
Just to clarify, he's there was something to do with a drug deal, and he killed he killed one of his brothers in the MC.
Okay, okay.
That's
So,
what
oh, okay,
happened.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's definitely a kick out right there.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, so that makes sense with his way of handling of control, where his religious doctrine is, "I want to forget." Of course, you want to forget because you just got you got kicked out of a place that I would assume that he valued the way they all do. The brotherhood of being in the mongrels. Um, and that makes sense with his way of controlling people, which is like we all have something we want to forget. Let's just freak out, get low, or I forget what the third thing they keep saying all the time, um, and uses drugs. Now, I don't know what the drug is. Some will say that he uses narcotics or something, but I do believe like that conversation that Schizo has with Deacon. He's like, I think I heard that it was PCP or something. And
Deacon references when I think it's after the Ripper attack at the dam, if I remember correctly. He says that they're acting like people he's seen in the past who were high on PCP or bath salts. So he's not
yeah,
saying they are on PCP or bath salts. He's like, the Rippers, the way they act reminds me of people I've seen
oh
before
yeah, yeah,
that were
yeah,
high on these specific drugs. And I think that is been misremembered by enough people that it's sort of become part of the lore that, oh no, they're on PCP, but it's never
Yeah,
actually stated in the game that they're on PCP. They just have a similar behavior.
it's a real purple monkey dishwasher situation. Okay. Oh,
What what
it
is
just
that?
mean it just it's just telephone. You know, you play a game of
Oh, right,
telephone.
yeah.
So someone says like, "Hey, I like cheese," and then you go through enough people, the last person just says purple. Oh, someone said purple monkey dishwasher or something.
Right.
The
Yeah.
Simpsons reference. Um, so when you're in a cult, how do you control people? Yeah, drugs works. Religious doctrine, that plus drugs, that works too because
Mhm.
you know they're high enough to believe the religious doctrine. Torture to break people, sure, that's how you do it. If they don't want to follow rank, uh, the woman that you have to smother to death,
Yeah, you mercy kill.
yeah, I assume that that had, you know, I'm going to assume that it had something to do with them not wanting to participate or just in general, like you torture to break people. Maybe not them in particular, but if you're in the cult and you see shit like that happening all the time, it'll break you, you know? You
Mhm.
will. How do you not break when you see mutilation of that fucking level? The act of mutilation itself, as you mentioned earlier with Lisa, yeah, that makes sense because it represents what happened to Carlos. You know, he got mutilated.
It's almost like a new version of the colors. You know, the cut, the biker cut, the idea of emblems and patches and a visual representation of belonging to a brotherhood or to a society. They do all the
Yeah,
scars and everything, and it's like they're all very similar, and it's like, yeah, we belong. We can instantly tell we're together. We're brothers.
yeah, and it's also easy to identify
Hmm.
someone who's a Ripper just based on the fact like their face is all mutilated as shit or the scars or something like that. And usually you can tell because they're bald, but I mean,
Right.
I think that's a choice that they make. Ongoing brainwashing, the loudspeakers, that helps too. That's how you get perspective. That's how you get potential new recruits.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
if you're a marauder and you're not quite sure, you know, it makes sense. It's the type of marketing that would be used if you were in a cult,
Never
you
even
know.
thought about marketing in Days Gone, but yeah, you're right. They
Yeah,
do.
well, I mean,
It's a little bit of publicity.
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. I think that they wouldn't. I think that he uses it as a form of indoctrination, you know. But in other, I mean, if you're like roaming around, you're a drifter or whatever, and you're tired of it, and you hear this loudspeaker saying all the things that he's saying, you know, like, oh, forget the past, get with us, get low, or something. I don't know if any of the loudspeakers tell you specifically to come to Iron Butte or something, but uh, you'd hear that all the time. And obviously, when you turn them off, like depending on what part of the game you're on, if you haven't met Carlos or you haven't found out he was Jesse, he'll say like, "Ah, oh, fucking Carlos, this shit's bullshit" or something. Then after you handle Jesse or something, he has a different attitude. He goes,
Mm.
"Ah, oh, Jesse, I'm so sorry. I really
I'm
apologize. You
sorry for
know,
what we did to you.
yeah, I'm sorry that
You're
we
still
did or
fucking
something.
crazy.
Yeah, you're fucking crazy, but man, you know, I guess that's my bad. I guess
Deacon
it's
does
his
feel a little
attitude.
remorse because he knows that he was a part of creating this monster, and it's like, yeah, he was a monster, but I mean, how many people do you have to kill because of that monster? You know, how many lives has that monster ruined, including the monster himself?
Yeah, and you got to imagine that maybe maybe he got rid of Jesse, and he might have flooded the area, but that doesn't mean that the Rippers are dead
Right.
100%. There's like a mission later on in the game where the Colonel's like, "There's some weirdos out there. You know anything about that?" And he's like, "Oh, the fucking Rippers, Jesus, you know."
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
so
they're
like,
still around, definitely.
yeah. So you got to imagine. Okay, so there's your there. I just thought about that right now. There's your like political aspect of it. Do the Rippers go away because you got rid of Jesse? The answer is based on that level or that mission where you have to take out a camp that has Rippers. It depends if they decide to continue being a Ripper. Now, you could have like a situation where they splinter off into different factions of Rippers, but the idea of like his thing is if you want to get rid of something, like we try to get rid of rats, so put them in a bag and full of water. So he thinks that by getting rid of Jesse, that means like, oh, the Rippers are gone. And by accounts, based on what I've seen in the game, you only come across them story wise the one time with that mission. But I mean, you still see remnants of them. There's like a when you go to like a NERO camp or something, he'll say something like, "Oh, damn, Ripper's still here" or
Yeah,
something, or some shit like that.
there's a couple camps that they still have, like ambush camps or whatever. They're still around.
And you got to imagine that if people do believe in that in that thing, because like even if Jesse's gone, that doesn't mean that that idea hasn't disappeared, because otherwise you'd have to kill all the Rippers, and based on what I've seen, that's not the case. So you would imagine that, and this is all headcanon for like future ideas of like, you know, expanded universe of sorts, this idea like maybe perhaps they didn't get rid of the Rippers. Maybe the Rippers evolved with a new leader. Maybe you got rid of Carlos, but you didn't get rid of all of them. And all it really takes is someone like Carlos to be as charismatic and someone that they all buy into as like, oh, and it's a cult too. So, I mean, all it takes is drug a bunch of people and beat them up and tell them I am the reincarnation of Carlos, and you'd buy it, right? I mean, I would assume I mentioned the Branch Davidians. I mean, that whole thing was that David Koresh saw himself as the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. So if you're in a cult and your cult leader died, that doesn't mean your cult's dead. That means that there's a new opportunity.
Someone is going to fill that power void.
Yeah.
Someone is going to step up and be like, I got this. This is the opportunity I was looking for.
Yeah, it's a power vacuum. And in that situation, all it really takes is one person who believes in it enough to take over. And just because you got rid of Jesse was like a type of person. You don't know if they're going to come back, and who's that in charge, and are they going to leave you alone, or are they going to keep the faith going like, well, it was those fucking mongrels that got rid of us, so now we're really going to go hard and go heavy. And that's just speculation, you know. I would assume that besides the other problems that they have when the game is over, but I would assume that that's not the last you see of the Rippers. Certainly the last you see of Carlos, but not the last of the Rippers.
Right.
Based on the idea of like, who doesn't want to be in charge of a cult if you're in the cult?
Yeah.
Know?
All right. So I want to move on to the militia. Is this a military structure, a pseudo-military structure, a dictatorship? What is going on with the militia?
Well, it's a little bit of everything, actually. In Latin America, we had these currently and in history, we have these things called military juntas, and they were essentially like governments run by military officials. Like you had like a general who was the dictator. We had a lot of that going on in Latin America, where, you know, Central America definitely in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, and South America and all that stuff. I'm not too well versed in terms of military dictatorships in other places, but because I'm, you know, Latin American descent, I'm very well familiar with governments that are based on a military organization. And this is pretty much this is pretty much it with the DCM. I have a hard time saying the name, the first name, the D.
Deschutes.
Was it Deschutes? Yeah. They shoots, all right. There you go. Sorry, that's my shitty joke of the night.
No, I like it.
Okay, so pseudo in the sense, I guess, if you wanted to make fun of them, like yeah, sure, like you're a military thing.
Well, they make a lot of errors if they're going for like actual military ranks and insignia and things like that. There's a lot of like
they don't
things
know,
they do wrong. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs, but
no, neither do I. I'm just familiar. Well, like from a political standpoint, I'm familiar with this organization that they have, where like, traditionally in a government, you want to have civilians running the government. The military portion and the civilian portion are hand in hand important in running a government. But in terms of like everyone feeling a little bit better, the citizens wise, you definitely want civilian oversight in your military, and you definitely don't want the military having that much power in terms of how your organization functions. So in this case, this is a classic case of the military being in charge of everyday government stuff. That was like the least smart thing I said, the stuff part. But I don't. Okay, so there's certain aspects about this that I don't know. Is the colonel really a colonel?
One thing I'd read, and again, I will reiterate, I don't know for sure, but I've read that he's calls himself the colonel, but he wears like the insignia of a general, which is different. And it's like
Oh,
little
so he
things
just
like
calls
that.
himself the colonel.
Yeah,
Like,
it's like
oh,
little
it's
things
me,
like
the
that
colonel.
where when I say pseudo-military, I mean they're using a military appearance as like a facade, a wrapping
Oh, but that,
around
yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
dictatorship or whatever it is. It's like that's the front, but it's not really, they don't really know.
Yeah, well, that's a classic militia too.
Yeah, it's in the same way that he is a, he spouts religious ideas and doctrine and viewpoints, but he doesn't seem to really know the Bible, even though he's claiming to have this sort of biblical view of things, of what they're trying to do. And he even later on, is sort of kind of saying that we were sent by God to cleanse the world. And yet he doesn't know Genesis from Revelation.
Yeah. Well, it could be an act. I mean, it could be a gimmick
That's
because.
what I mean. Yeah, it's like pseudo-military in that gimmicky way. It's like it's a front.
Oh, okay. I was taking it as I was taking in terms of like, are they kind of a military? Because I was thinking like I've seen this. I've seen in this type of like structure before in government where the military is the one in charge, but you're saying in terms of him actually knowing what he's doing, then yeah, I guess I could see that because I don't know those details where he kind of doesn't quote the Bible well or anything like that. I do like that theory that you brought up in a couple streams ago because I noticed that right off the bat on my second playthrough when the doctor wants to go out on a run and he and the colonel denies him that
Mm-hmm.
and he goes like now most people would say no, we can't, you're a vital member of this organization, or most people would go like, "Oh, most definitely not. That's bullshit. No, no." But how does the colonel say it? He says it very lovingly, and he says like, "I don't know. I don't know what we would do without you."
I think he says, "I don't know what I would do if I
I
lost
don't know
you."
what I would
I
do.
think he
Yeah,
kind of slips in an I, not a we, not the camp. What would the
yeah,
camp
yeah,
do
yeah.
without a doctor?
There's
It's I don't know what I would do if I lost you.
exactly. You're right. But the tone that he says it, any other conversation, like if I felt emotional towards a person, I would say it in that way. But if I was talking to a coworker
Or a subordinate, because the
or a
doctor
support,
is,
oh yeah, that's
below
true.
rank into,
No fraternizing, no fraternizing.
yeah.
So I think you mentioned that a while back on a Tuesday stream,
Mm-hmm.
and when I played it again and I came across that scene, and I was like, "Ooh, that's pretty good. Oh, that's a good theory. That's a good one." Because you would uh, you would be the type of person, much like Carlos, to believe in something, much like religion, or in Carlos' sense, like whatever fucked up thing he believes in, so much that it would probably make you, because after his death, that's when his religious thing really kicks into high gear.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you followed that theory, I would say that his whole thing when he unhinges in terms of religion is like you got to double down on it, because in theory, if you were having a little fun with a doctor, it would be a punishment.
Mm-hmm.
He would interpret it as punishment for his the way he would interpret it was that he committed some kind of sin, and so the doctor had to go, and now you got to really double down on the religion to make that happen.
Right.
And then you would cover it up by saying, "Oh no, it's not just because of him. We need to protect all the important individuals. You know, Sarah's got to keep in. Weaver's got to go
Yeah,
in.
everyone gets moved into the
yeah,
arc at that
the
point.
scientist. Yeah, that's what I want. The scientist. That's the reason. You know,
Yeah.
no other
But
reason.
it's
But
funny,
that's the theory.
not to go on too much of a tangent, and I just want to give a shout out to Spornicus Rex. He actually came up with that theory. Or didn't, I don't know if he came up with that theory, but he's the one who told me about that observation about the way the Colonel says that, because I'd said that it's interesting that right before then, Sarah goes out on a run, or Sarah's say, or sorry, right after then, Sarah says, "I'm going to go out on a run," and the Colonel is like, "Okay."
Yeah.
But the doctor wants to go out, and he's like, no, I don't know what I would do if I lost you. But oh yeah, Sarah, the scientist who's trying to create what he believes is a mega weapon, what she knows to be a fucking cure for the virus. This is a world-saving event, a world-saving solution. Yeah, she can fuck off out in the shit.
Yeah. Not to be devil's advocate or anything, but could it also be because he doesn't really take Sarah's option that seriously?
But
I
I
mean,
think he
enough for
does.
him, to have all these resources, to have Deacon specifically be there to ensure that she gets what she needs to make it happen. But I don't know. Like I thought that as soon as Weaver starts saying napalm, or as soon as like Weaver's like project seems to gain more wind than
Yes.
her, then it seems like well, worst case scenario, we get two ways of getting rid of the freaks. Right now, worst case scenario, we have one. Best case, we got two. I mean, not to disparage that idea, but I'm just
No,
saying, like,
no,
from
it's a fair point. At that point, there is still the competition between Weaver and Sarah.
which, why would you have that? You have two people that, I mean, two for the price of one. Why would they make it seem like it's a competition? I don't know. Maybe
I
it's a
think that's just
science.
I think that's
The
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 Colonel's
doctor. Yeah.
way of encouraging people to work better, is to sort of foster competition between the two of them. But it's still very much like a whoever wins the competition, whoever's weapon comes to fruition first, will, it's not specified, but it's sort of implied that they will kind of get some sort of perks or something, or they will win in some way, and the other person will just get relegated to some shit job, whether it's helping the
Yeah.
one who won or some other fucking thing that they don't care about. Because obviously
Yeah.
for Sarah, we know that she's looking for a cure. It's like fucking awesome. Her work is really important. Weaver's just trying to figure out how to dissolve styrofoam in gasoline and stick it in a fucking growler jug
While listening to a pretty sick psychedelic beat.
while listening to his MP3 player. Yep.
How dare you make me go through that horde just for your fucking MP3 player? Ridiculous.
Love that mission.
I did not get to the community college horde until much later. Because I was well enough in stamina and health to be okay with like some of the hordes. So we get to that part where he's like, go get, and then I forgot that I had to go activate the NERO checkpoint there, and the horde was there, and I was like, oh, you, yeah. And then what a dick, like as soon as I give him the MP3 player, he doesn't even say anything. He just puts on the headphones and he just tra la 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 la. Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you know how many freakers were there?
Like, do you know what it took? Do you know how many
Do
times
you
I
know?
died and reloaded?
Do you know how many stamina pills I had? You know how many berries I had to forage to make this happen? Yeah, Deke's a cool guy. He's just doing his job.
Yeah.
So where are we on this? Oh, okay. So the expectation of obedience.
Which is actually, I put that in the notes, that's actually a line from one of his speeches. He does say
Okay,
there's an
yeah.
expectation of
Well,
obedience.
when you're in a military, I mean, here's the deal. Even if you have no idea how a military structure works, or if you're like the most seasoned, 20 level prestige on Call of Duty person, everyone knows that the military is highly disciplined. And the number two thing that they all know about being in the military is you got to follow orders. But I would say that when he wants obedience, it's like on a level way beyond just the usual, you got to follow your superior kind of thing.
Right. And that's where it kind of, the religion and the theology kind of, for me, come into play, that you're not just obedient to the rules of the, and to orders. It's almost like you have to give your being to them, give yourself. You have to love the militia, and you have to understand
give yourself to a higher power kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's like what is the word I'm looking for? Like the morals of it. You have to live up to
the ideals and the principles. And
yeah, because he has that whole speech about. He talks several times actually about how, we don't want the thieves and the rapists and the murderers and the drug addicts and this and that and blah, blah, blah. and from the old world or again now. So there's that whole idea of like, you could have been like that before and we don't want you. And if you're like that now, we don't want you. Like, you have to be obedient to the principles of the militia. But there's also that double standard that, you know, Deacon has killed people, you know, and a lot of the people that he lets into the camp are thieves, murderers, rapists, drug addicts, you know, bad elements. These are the people that have survived in this world. So it's like,
But he
how are
gets a
you
he gets a pass though because he's a veteran. I mean,
right?
he gets a pass because he was a soldier at one point,
Yeah,
and he likes that. You can tell. Like there's like this glee in him when because he doesn't have that with what did you say her name was? Cynthia, the
Crystal.
prisoner? Crystal, sorry. Yeah, he doesn't have that. Like he already knows like, oh, you are a fucking heathen according to him.
Yeah,
And then Deacon, you know, uh tell me you served and I'll know if you lie. And you know, he makes that joke like he hates it. It's like, oh yeah, I hated every year of it. And he's just like, ha 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 kind of thing. So um which is probably how the captain probably got in his good graces because he also fought. He has like a strong affinity. Well, if you created your own military, you're gonna really like people that were actually in the military. You know,
yeah.
you
He's
value
probably like
those
fanboying a
individuals.
little bit.
Yeah. Which, by the way, that's why I asked. I'm like, is he really a colonel? Like, did he actually fight or something? Because he's got like a weird. I watched a lot of MASH, and so here we go with the MASH.
You're basing
I
your
watched.
entire knowledge of the military on
Oh
MASH.
well, yeah. I mean, no, everything I learned in MASH. But like in the movie and in the TV show, you get these people that were not in the military, but because they are, for some reason, they get higher ranks. Like they get colonel when they were a doctor or something like that. Like they're not colonels or captains because they were in the army. And there's some certain people in the show that were like that. But the ones that were given that high rank and they weren't, they have this attitude like, yeah, I'm a colonel. Yeah, you got to do what I say or something. That's kind of the vibe I get from him. Is that like that's what I'm saying? Like when you're in a militia, it's kind of hard to, especially in the apocalypse, it's kind of hard to verify that.
Yeah.
Other than his so-called "I'll know if you're lying"
I mean, he didn't
aspect of it.
know that Wade was a drug addict. He didn't.
No, he didn't know.
He
He's got a
didn't
terrible
know.
sense of
Yeah.
judgment.
But what I wanted to go back to is the idea of that expectation of obedience. In his first, I believe it's in his first speech, he says any infraction, no matter how small, will result in being hanged.
Oh yeah. Kangaroo
Any
court.
infraction, he actually specifies like that. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter how small it is. You will be brought to the scaffold and you will be hanged.
And that's a total 180. That's a total difference to Iron Mike, whose whole reason for letting go of Schizo was because he wouldn't get a fair trial,
Right.
which is bullshit. Because like, how do you not get a fair trial? What are you going to do? Like, I think you mentioned that or something. Like, you're going to get people from Hot Springs because they're impartial. You know, like they're not going to do that. Like this concept of like, I think he says it too for some of the missions where I want him back alive so he can hang. But what do you mean? Like, you mean like get a fair trial? Oh, he'll get a fair trial.
And then he'll hang.
Then he'll hang.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like I said, which is way different than like Iron Mike. Iron Mike's like,
gives everyone a second chance. He tells Deacon, if you come back, I'll shoot you. And then Deacon comes back and it doesn't shoot him. Gives him a second chance, puts him in a very powerful position.
Yeah, and I would assume, obviously, a situation like what Taylor does. I mean, he does kill the doctor. That's a serious infraction. Like, obviously, I feel weird using that as an example of like, oh, the colonel's too far. Like, yeah, that's a serious thing. But the idea of what Taylor says, I don't want to hang because they're gonna laugh at me.
That speech I found powerful.
I love Taylor so much.
I felt, although yes, he did kill the doctor, I felt bad for him in that moment. I mean, his punishment is still death.
Yeah.
You know, Deacon still kills him. But a death where you are hanged is cruel. And where you are hanged in front of a bunch of people who you know are going to be cheering your death, maybe laughing at you. It
Yeah.
just seems, it just is, the world does not need more cruelty. I'm usually a person that, there's that personality quiz thing of like, do you value mercy over justice or justice over mercy? I usually value justice over mercy. But in the case of Wade, the mercy option was the better one. Definitely.
Yeah, because he's not asking, because in that situation, he's not asking to be let go. He knows he needs to die. He just doesn't want to die like that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, because he doesn't want to, like, he doesn't struggle. Like, he pulls out the syringe, he looks
knows
at him.
he deserves to die.
Yeah, he deserves to die. And it happens. And he did it on his terms. Which I would argue, like, is it really up to him? It's not really up to him, especially if he killed someone else. But yeah, I mean, he knows. For as stupid as they present him as, like way off. What's he doing? What's a guy like him doing in a situation like this? I know someone like Deacon could survive. I know someone as cruel as the Rippers could survive. What the hell does in the beginning I was like, what the hell does he bring? What's he do that? And I realized, yeah, he just sort of not to refer to Schizo, but like much like Schizo, he kind of skeezes his way through one event to another. He doesn't join the militia because he wants to be in a militia. It seems like they found him and he just was kind of like, okay, yeah, sure, whatever.
Cool, yeah, I can ride this for a bit, see what I can get out of it.
Yeah. And then he started, like, one of the first things he says, he's like, I don't know about this.
Yeah. I mean, he's a drug addict. One thing we know about drug addicts is they're good at lying and convincing people that, no, man, I need this money that you're going to lend me to buy some food. And then, I'm totally going to go and buy heroin.
Yeah. It's basically like, it's the name of the game for an addict is like, where can I score more drugs? And that classic, I know I did something wrong. But see, that's what's so different about him is that he knows he did something wrong. He just doesn't want to die in the way because it kind of breaks in terms of what the expectation of obedience that you said, like all infractions. He knows he's going to he's going to die. He's going to do all this. He just doesn't want to die on their terms. And to feed and essentially to feed in the narrative that the colonel is presenting to the crew. Like, he doesn't see himself as a guy who's going to accept his punishment in the way of, like, let's say Iron Mike would interpret punishment or justices. He sees himself as a spectacle. He's like, I know this is going to be a shit show. This isn't going to, like, I'm going to go over there and they're going to talk a bunch of purple poetry about justice and all this stuff. I know I did something terrible. But that's not how you guys are going to use it. You're going to use this as, he's a prop to his propaganda to continue the expectation of obedience. Like, I always do what I say, right? I mean, this is what I expect. And this is a way to scare people because as you said, like, I didn't know it was any infraction. So that sucks too, because it's like, you're scaring people into obedience. Like, what you always got to ask in that situation, what does an infraction mean to you? Like, what counts as an infraction? Because to me, it's like, not following orders. Is that a hangable offense? Not really. I mean, worst case scenario, you get sent to go work in the labor camps for a couple of weeks till you get the right attitude back. That's another thing I noticed. They have a labor camp too. They are also aware that not everyone is fit to serve. If I use the parlance of their if I use their vernacular, they Crystal is never gonna fucking follow the rules or something.
No.
So she gets sent to the labor camp, and you also have to ask that question, much like Hot Springs. What happens if you can't serve? What happens if you can't work? And what happens if, like, when you're like Taylor, you can't even do shit except the bare minimum. What was his job? Oh, his job was to watch
guard the doctors.
Which is a pretty easy job for him. I mean, not because he's an addict, but because the job doesn't require much. You just have to sit there and make sure he's safe. You're in the bowels of Wizard Island. You can't fuck that job up.
No one is going to come and challenge you there.
No one is going to challenge you. So you don't have to do anything
but just be present.
Yeah, but the fact that you have to guard the hospital means that his rhetoric of, like, obedience is bullshit. It's already off the party. Why would you need a guard to guard the hospital if you know for a fact that everyone is going to follow your lead to the letter, and if they steal it, wouldn't they be more afraid of being caught and being hung, like you keep saying to everyone? I mean, like, we're talking about hypocrisy of every camp.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big plot hole of this whole structure that he has, is that he expects everyone to follow his rules. But why would you need all this extra security if you didn't need to? I mean, the first mission involves finding someone who went AWOL and is doing really, really shitty things. And their attitude is to simply say, well, he's not one of us. But that's real easy for them to say that, because for them, like, a true member of the militia wouldn't do this nasty shit. But as soon as they stray off the path, they are immediately to wash them off from the record and say, they're not one of us. They're heathens or whatever. We're us and that's them. As soon as they do something really disgusting,
us versus them mentality.
And it's easier to forget, easier to either forget about them, or in the case of what Deacon is good at, which is bounty hunting, which is like, it's easier to send someone to go do on a bounty if you tell them right off the bat, well, they're not one of us, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, wasn't it like bringing back their band or something?
Yeah, bring back the band or whatever.
They're really interested in bringing it back, because you can do whatever the fuck you want, but I'll be damned if you're going to do it in our name. So they're more interested in the idea of what the militia represents, as opposed to the practical application of making sure everyone is okay.
Yeah. And there's also the us versus them is a really easy psychological tool to use to get people to stick with your doctrine.
Yeah,
if you just create an idea, you're part of a club here. You're one of the team. Go you. Yeah. You're awesome. Aren't we awesome? And everyone else who's not part of our team, they're the enemy. Fuck and those guys.
It's interesting that works on all levels. On all levels of every single person. Like, even the most simplest one. The us and them worked with the motorcycle club. The us and them works in all the camps. The us and them in general, there's us and the freaks. And then later on, the freaks themselves, which I would assume, you know, when you know the true ending, they probably would see that as a pejorative. But then the freaks themselves probably have that attitude about us or the people.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So Dictator 101, make sure that them is terrible and us is good, you know?
I want to go back to something you were saying a minute ago about the disobedience and about the hypocrisy, and how if you would need a guard for the doctor's hut, like your system is falling apart and people aren't really following the rules or respecting the power, or they're not in fear enough of the repercussions of doing something wrong. One thing that's I find interesting is Corey wearing Sarah's ring. Now, he's stationed at Diamond Lake, which he doesn't really see the colonel ever. He's out over there wearing jewelry, and jewelry is forbidden because it's all confiscated from them when they come in. He has a ring on that he wears, you know, it's Deacon's mongrel's ring, like it's fucking badass big ring. You're not hiding that.
Oh, dude, the look on Deacon's face when he sees that ring. Oh, my God. The first time I saw that run through, I was like, oh my God, no, because that ring represents everything, you know.
And it's just like, on some random dude's finger, and you're like, what the fuck? Who is this guy?
So what do you think he was thinking when he saw it? Did he think like, oh my God, she met someone else, or did he think, oh my God, this guy did something to her? Because that look on his face is like, it's anger, like it's a silent anger, but I can't place my finger as to whether or not he's angry because he thinks she moved on, or because he knows that means she was there or is here, or something happened or something.
1,000% the latter. 1,000%. Okay, he thinks something's happened to her. My personal reaction to seeing that was, ooh, this is a clue. You know, we're supposed to think, oh, maybe, like you say, those two options. Either something happened to Sarah at this guy's hand, or she has moved on and whatever. I took it more as something happened to Sarah, and something happened to the people who did whatever it was to Sarah, were involved in some way, and then Corey is like somehow got the ring from those people. I thought it would be multiple layers. Like this is a clue on the trail. It's a breadcrumb on the trail.
Yeah, because he does have that, like, him being sly about it, which is like on the way over, I think, to the college or something. He says something like, "Hey,
Mm.
whatever happened to your ring?"
Yeah, and she's
And
like,
I was
she's
thinking, like,
vague, like, oh,
ooh,
I sort of, they took it off me. I don't really know.
which count? I mean that. I mean that's accurate. I mean that. I mean that's why I was saying, like, how paranoid must he have been when he saw the ring or something.
Mm.
And also, I kind of eventually stopped thinking that way because I'm a cynic. I'm like this cynical bastard when it comes to that part of storytelling. But I would figure, like, doesn't really see him that much, and when she does, it's like to see what progress is going on. And she probably doesn't even notice him that much to really figure, because she would have noticed if she really had seen him that much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that ring is a big fucking ring.
Yeah, you can't hide that ring.
You can't hide the
And
ring.
especially
And
when they're all
then,
like saluting, bring their hands up and stuff,
yeah,
like you would see that.
and how does the colonel, since you brought it up, how does the colonel? You would assume that the colonel sees him all the time. How does
Well,
he?
that's what I'm
I
thinking.
know
I think
he.
he doesn't. Because they have the radios, and I think he trusts Corey to run Diamond Lake, and I don't think. Because Corey is kind of. No, they do. I'm sorry, I'm totally wrong. He is there with the colonel a few times.
He probably puts up with it in the same way that he puts up with his scientists and doctors being informal. That's probably
Mm-hmm.
just his way of
I think it's a
appeasing to the
perk.
cap.
It's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like but it's funny that it's like, on the one hand, any infraction, no matter how small, will result in being hanged. But you guys can, you don't have to use all the military lingo, and you can wear jewelry, and I'm going to hook up with the doctor, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like
Yeah. Well, yeah.
hypocrisy
I
through and
mean, I
through.
mean, you got. I mean, like you said. I mean, you gotta ask yourself, like, how accurate is the situation? If I mean, if anything, by that logic, you shouldn't have guards. I think one of the first things you bump into, that I always bump into whenever I go get my usual supply run or something in the camp, is those two dudes in front of what I'm assuming is like either explosives or something, and they're
The
like, "Hey,
armory. Yeah.
yeah, you're not supposed to be here." It's like, well, why are you giving me that attitude? Like, this should be a non-issue. You shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be here. Just like Taylor shouldn't be there to guard the hospital. Just like everyone should be, according to him, everyone should be functioning in the perfect utopia that he sets himself to. The Rippers don't even do that. The Rippers don't function in that way. In some strange way, the Rippers have a more handle on how to, other than the hypocrisy that Carlos actually does care about his past way more than he would want his followers to care.
Mm-hmm.
Because for a guy who's telling you, "I want to forget," he seems
Awfully hung up
hell
on his
bent. Yeah,
past.
he's hung up on his past,
Yeah.
which I don't know if that's
But apart from
that.
that, you're right. There is not a lot of hypocrisy in the Rippers. Their beliefs are a lot more simplified. Like you were saying earlier about the lack of nuance, the sort of overt, like, yeah, these guys are just a crazy fucking cult. There's not a lot of depth going on, but their system is, it works. You don't see any Rippers breaking any rules.
Yeah, the subordinates themselves, no, with the exception of Lisa. But I think Lisa didn't really give a shit. I think Lisa's like the woke one that realized that this
Yeah,
was bullshit too.
yeah. But
So I don't know.
in the militia, it's like constant
Yeah, there's
breaking of
constant
the
horseshit.
rules.
There's always bounty hunting there's like bounty hunting missions where you're taking out people that either went AWOL. Yeah. And there's your obedience right there, Colonel. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
What's his full name? Colonel, the name's
Garrett,
always his
Matthew
Colonel
Garrett.
Garrett. Yeah. Come on, Garrett. Yeah, get your shit together. Colonel.
So one last thing I want to talk about is NERO, and their kind of ideology in this world.
Okay, so a lot of this is speculation and like head canon and head theory, but I would say this: Nero represents the Fed. Obviously, they're the last organization that represents the old form order of what government was, aka like the analog of our current government system, or B, they themselves because they're probably like the only group that had an idea of what was going on. Because I think it's the company that had the virus going on, and then NERO understanding that. They're the ones that are doing the most work researching on the freaks. But if you got the super super cool secret ending, must be this cool to watch, you realize that Nero is essentially the final form of the freaks. Like O'Brien is one of many, I have to assume, that are the evolved form. And you got to assume there's got to be an even more evolved form if you could believe that. But in my estimation of like Nero being the last vestige of the old order of what society used to be politically, they would probably interpret all the concepts that we had about all the different camps. And the only perk that they have is that they are, for all intents and purposes, the new form of dominance within the society. So, one of the things that when O'Brien says there's nothing you can do about it, he's basically saying we're going to be in charge now. And again, I'm not a speculator. I'm not going to be that guy that's like, oh, D's gone 3, D gone 4, or whatever. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. But my estimation in terms of me analyzing this, as I always do from a political standpoint, at the end of the day, all these camps could fight amongst themselves all they want. In fact, that's kind of what's being insinuated, because much like the Rippers, just because you got rid of the colonel doesn't mean you got rid of the militia.
Mm-hmm.
There's been instances where a big militia like that could splinter into different groups. Captain Curry was probably like the only one that, as far as we know, that had a level head on him, and he got the fuck out there. He fucked off for a while, or whatever. But as much as they want to do all the infighting, Lost Lake is now the sort of like the coolest place to be in compared to everything. There's infighting. There's going to be, I don't know, like Civil War like behavior within the other camps, because Deacon has a relationship with every single camp. None of that is going to matter if Nero figures out a way to organize themselves. And you have to imagine that they have, because they have helicopters. That's like the one thing that nobody has. They don't have the kind of technology that Nero has. It's funny that they're called Nero, because it ties in with the whole Roman Empire thing.
Yeah.
They have what it takes, I would assume. I would be afraid of the idea of Nero with the higher elevated forms of freakers like O'Brien, because that's the only one we see. And I'm assuming that the other scientists that he is like monitoring, they probably have the same affliction that he has.
Mm-hmm.
And the soldiers too, I don't see any of their faces, just like O'Brien. So you have to, down the line, again, this is just head theory or head canon, you got to assume that they're all going to have to live with the inevitability that none of their ideologies matter, because at the end of the day, all that counts is it's them, the humans, and the freakers. And now you got a highly evolved form of freaker that can talk. They have the same strength. And the thing that scares me is if they have a way to control the freakers that don't have that ability. If
using
they develop
the pheromones and the hive mind.
Yeah, if they could use the hive mind pheromone ability, game over, man. Game over. But that's just me being a cynical bastard. There's a part of me that thinks that perhaps maybe as long as they have people like O'Brien in the area of the Nero situation, perhaps there's a way to broker a peace. But I don't want to think like Iron Mike. That might be too soon down the road. But it is. But I would say that if you had a relationship with the freaker, O'Brien's a pretty good one. He's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
He knows you. I mean, he knows Deacon personally. So I would imagine
he seems to care on some level about what's happening. You just get the impression that he still has a moral compass.
Yeah, he doesn't trust any of the other scientists. In fact, he I don't know. Maybe he does. I don't know.
He does use Deacon to get the intel.
Maybe he does. Yeah, maybe he doesn't look at Deacon in the way that he would look at someone of his contemporary or something. I don't know.
It is telling, because it's like this guy comes to you and says, "Hey, man, I've lost my wife. Fucking love her. She's gone. You have information that I need to get closure to figure out what happened. That's like, most people will be like, sure, I got you. I can find that information out. What does O'Brien do? He says, oh, you got to do something for me.
Yeah.
He turns it into a transaction.
Yeah, because nothing's free in this world.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
This seems like a decent place to end the discussion. I have a slight change to my usual wrap-up spiel. Every morning at around 7:30 a.m. Pacific time, you can watch me live stream my Survival 2 Fresh Start playthrough. I take on hordes, I talk shit about rippers, and I lay waste to ambush camps, all before I've had my morning cup of coffee. You can find me on my YouTube channel, just search for Days Gone Podcast. On Tuesdays, I hijack the Spornicus Rex YouTube channel for a collaborative livestream playthrough of Days Gone. He goes into advanced gameplay tactics and strategy, and I discuss the story, characters, and all the amazing details of the game. You can find us live on the Spornicus Rex YouTube channel every Tuesday night at 6 p.m. Pacific. And if you can't tune in live, both of those live streams are still available to watch afterwards on their respective channels. You can support the Days Gone podcast by leaving a review or giving us a thumbs up wherever you listen. That really helps the algorithm do its thing so more people can find the show. If you have friends who play Days Gone, please let them know about the podcast and perhaps give us a share on social media. You can also show your support by heading over to buymeacoffee.com/daysgonepod, where you can throw a little money in the tip jar if you're feeling generous. That really helps me with the overhead costs of running the show. And I want to give a very big shout out to Chrissy Cupcake for buying me 3 coffees, and Basics of Pain, you're the man, for buying me 10 coffees this week. Seriously, guys, thank you. I really appreciate that. Well, Ritchie, this has been absolutely amazing. We talked for a long time. This is definitely going to be at least a 2-parter. But this was fucking incredible. I feel like we really got into some good stuff here. So I want to say a super big thank you for coming on the podcast and talking with me about all this.
It was a real pleasure. I really had a fun time.
You can email me your thoughts, comments, opinions, and counter-arguments at daysgonepod@gmail.com. You can also find me moderating the Days Gone subreddit. Thanks for listening. Weaver out.